Hey, everybody, it's Carin Andersen here. I am typically saying this as part of events and videos with Aortic Hope, but today I'm talking to you as a member of the community, as just another survivor, and I don't say that lightly. I am sharing with you my story and how it applies to my family as part of the Think Aorta, Think Family campaign. Now, as we know in this campaign, aortic dissections are actually rare, but aortic disease is a lot more common than you think. And I have learned all of this over the last 8 years since I had my aortic dissection in 2015. So let's go back in time a little bit. So I have my dissection, okay? I thought it was a Crohn's related event, but I did get to my local hospital, and luckily for me, I was diagnosed very quickly. They did everything right. And I think a lot of that is because I had been in before, sharing stories about my Crohn's disease and mentioning tidbits about my family medical history. It just kind of came up. I didn't even understand the importance of that at the time. But after my dissection, during the first year of recovery, before Aortic Hope was even formed, I had switched cardiologists, and I had moved to a cardiologist who specializes in congenital heart defects and in cardiogenetics. And one of the first conversations we had was discussing a lot of information about my family medical history. And it's really interesting when you look back and you learn the details about your history, because all these dots start showing. And it took a while before I started connecting the dots. So let me share with you a little bit about my history. So I have Crohn's disease, okay? That is also genetically there's a genetic component, and it's hereditary in nature. My mother had Crohn's disease, and almost everybody in my mother's family had that. So check, I know where that bad gene came from, okay? Got a lot of bad genes, and again, I always say this, we're not talking about the kind that you wear. These are all genetics. Now, I switched to my father's side, and what I learned in that first year of recovery is that I knew that my father had heart disease, and I knew that his mother had heart disease. She had a 5-way bypass. My father had a triple bypass at the age of 45, and I was 45 when I had a dissection. So at the time of my dissection, my father had an abdominal aneurysm, and he would have been about 68 or so, I think, if I'm adding this right, 67. So he had an abdominal aneurysm. I had a thoracic aneurysm that I didn't know about. I also had detached my retinas back when I was in my early 20s. I found out that my grandmother, my father's mother, she also detached her retinas. My sister had holes in her retinas. So that's an interesting little blip, right? Degenerative disc disease in my back, which I always chalked off to just years of dancing, but my father had it too. And I believe my grandmother did too. That's another little interesting tidbit of information, okay? So I'm seeing all of these things starting to form a picture, but I'm not really sure what this is forming. But my cardiologist strongly suggested that I have genetic testing done. I did have about 3 physical characteristics of Marfan, but we didn't think that I had Marfan. I don't have Marfan syndrome. I actually have no syndrome known at this time, but they know that there's something there, but they didn't find anything definitive in my story. After a while, I was able to get my parents to agree to be genetically tested. They too, nothing came back as far as any of the aortopathies, as they're called, or direct genetic mutations that would cause an aortic dissection. So I knew that I could breathe easy with that for now, because we know that that is ever changing. So I have to now focus my attention on my sister and potentially on her daughter. And I especially need to focus my attention on my son, which was so hard to actually face because I was still so scared about what happened to me. And at that time that it happened to me, he was 15. Well, one of the things we immediately addressed to my high schooler was that as he signed up to take weightlifting, he could not do true weightlifting that a 15, 16-year-old boy wanted to do. And I'm talking about the heavy bench pressing, the who can bench press the most, who can leg press the most. We really had to have that conversation with him and explain that that taxing nature of that workout, it didn't need to happen. There was no sense in doing that. So I had to have a note written from my cardiologist to be given to his high school gym teacher to say lower weights, higher repetition due to a potential medical condition that we're just not seeing quite yet. So that I had to take care of, and I was not a favored parent at that point in time, but it was important. In addition, he had an echo. So we did schedule the echo. And to my surprise, he had a slightly enlarged upper chamber of his heart, which was due to some hypertension that we were not aware of. Because as we know, you would not necessarily know if you were pre-hypertensive or if you even had higher blood pressure. So that was our first indicator that there was a potential issue with blood pressure. And his aorta was potentially enlarged, but he's a bigger kid anyway, muscular build, tall, strong. So this could have just been his size, but it was still something to make us say, we need to continue monitoring. Probably going to monitor for the rest of his life. And did not do any genetic testing because there was nothing that was found in me. There was really nothing to test in him. And the idea is just because there's nothing that's found in me at this time, we both need to be treated as though we have something. So that's the key, is you continue with the monitoring. You continue with the doctor's appointments, and he's not monitored every year. He'll receive another scan actually this year, which is almost 5-6 years, or it's been a few years, actually longer that since the first one. He will receive his first MRI to kind of take a look and just get a nice baseline of his heart function and his aorta. I will say that the good that came out of this is that any potential issues that could be lying in him, we have found early, and he is being properly followed, having whatever medications he needs to have. He's been on a diet. He's now working out. He has put himself on a plan to success and in controlling what he can control. My father has since passed away, not due to his abdominal aneurysm, but due to that, I went and had another set of genetic testing done that could potentially explain what happened to him. And to my surprise, that test came back positive. Without freaking out, I reached out to our director of genetic education, Ryan Rodemer, and we had a discussion, as well as discussing this with the genetic team out of Johns Hopkins. And what I've learned is that just because you have a genetic mutation or something has come back in your testing doesn't mean it's turned on. Doesn't mean anything other than now when doctors look at you, they can look at you with a different set of eyes to try to stay many steps ahead. And for someone like me who likes to be in control of things, that's a good thing. So now I'm not having my son genetically tested. Of course, he's going to be 24. If he wants to, he can, but we're going to treat this situation as if it already is there in him and just monitor him. Just monitor him. And he's doing all he can for himself. My mom was tested. She did not have the gene I had, so now I know that it came from my father. My sister was tested. She was negative, so I don't have to worry about her or my niece. So in some ways, genetic testing ended up being a relief for me, a comfort, and it's also armed me with education so that I can stay as proactive as I can moving forward. Without the genetic testing, I'm still very active in moving forward and armed with the notion that I'm going to be treated as though something already does exist in me and my loved ones, and we're going to do everything we can to be proactive through monitoring, through diagnostic testing. So that's our story. And it's interesting because over the years, once Aortic Hope formed, and then we brought Think Aorta into this country and their amazing campaign launched, I've learned so much more about the importance of knowing your family medical history. And these conversations were nowhere near as hard as almost dying from an aortic dissection. Trust me, they really weren't. It was very enlightening to learn that I don't have a cancer gene. I was tested for that because cancer runs in the family. To learn that I am the only person who's had a dissection that we know of, but to understand the high likelihood that this is genetic and what I can do moving forward for myself and to teach my son. And it's empowering. I didn't have any of that when I had the dissection. I had nothing but vulnerability. So now I'm educated, and what I hope is that all of you will educate yourselves and understand this importance of thinking about your aorta, thinking about your family, having these conversations with your family members about your medical history and sharing these conversations with your physicians for the sole purpose of being able to be properly monitored and diagnosed if necessary, so you avoid any of the potentially fatal outcomes that can happen when nobody knows about any of this. So hopefully this story has resonated with you, and you'll be able to have these conversations amongst yourself and your family members as well. And remember, think aorta, think family. Thank you.